Amaka's hand went numb around the phone before her mind caught up with what her ears had just heard. "Say it again," she whispered, because some part of her believed that if Chanier repeated it, the words would rearrange themselves into something she could survive. "Amaka, I wish I was joking. It's a wedding. He's the groom." The salon around her did not stop. That was the cruelty of it. The blow-dryer 2 chairs down kept roaring. Someone's phone was playing a gospel highlife song low enough to be background music and loud enough to mock her. A woman under the hooded dryer was laughing at something on her phone, head tilted back, gold hoops catching the fluorescent light. Life did not pause to acknowledge that Amaka Chukwuma's had just ended. "Amaka? Amaka, talk to me." She realized she had not moved. She was still sitting in the salon chair, half of her hair freshly relaxed, half of it still rolled in pink perm rods, a plastic cape tied around her neck like a bib for a child who could not be trusted to feed herself. Her stylist, a young girl named Ijeoma who could not have been more than 20, was still holding a rat-tail comb in one hand and a jar of setting lotion in the other, watching Amaka's face the way one watches a pot that has begun to boil over but has not yet spilled. "Madam, you okay?" Ijeoma asked. Amaka did not answer her. She could not. Her mouth had become a locked door, and behind it something enormous was throwing its whole weight against the wood, again and again, trying to get out. "Chanier," she said into the phone, and her own voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger, thin and careful, the voice of someone walking across ice. "Where is this wedding?" "Amaka, please, don't do anything foolish. Let me come to you first. Let us talk." "Chanier, where?" There was a silence on the line, the kind of silence that comes before someone decides to stop protecting you because they have finally understood that protection is no longer possible. "St. Augustine's," Chanier said quietly. "The one by the old market road. The reception is after, at the Grand Delta Events Center." "Amaka, please." Amaka had already pulled the phone from her ear. She was staring at herself in the mirror in front of her, at the woman with half a head of chemically straightened hair and half a head of curled rollers, at the plastic cape, at the face that had, until 4 minutes ago, belonged to a woman who believed she was getting married in 6 weeks. "Ijeoma," she said, "take this off me." "Madam, we haven't finished the—" "Take it off, now." Something in her tone made the girl move without another word. The pink rollers came loose one by one, clattering into the small plastic tray, half-set curls springing free in odd, uneven shapes. Amaka did not care what she looked like. She had stopped caring what she looked like the moment Chanier said the word groom. She stood up so fast the cape slid to the floor. "Madam, your hair is still wet." "I don't have time, Ijeoma. I don't have time." She grabbed her handbag from the little shelf beneath the mirror, and it was only as her fingers closed around the strap that she noticed her hands were shaking, not gently, but violently, the way hands shake in cold weather, except the salon was warm and there was no cold anywhere except inside her chest. The other women in the salon had gone quiet now. They were watching her the way people watch an accident, torn between the instinct to look away and the human hunger to see exactly how bad it is. Somebody murmured something to her neighbor. Amaka did not hear the words. She did not need to. She could imagine them well enough on her own. She would spend the rest of the year imagining them. She was almost at the door when the salon owner, an older woman named Mama Ronk who had done Amaka's hair since she was a teenager, stepped into her path, not to stop her, but simply to hold her by the shoulders for one moment, the way an aunt holds a child before letting them run into traffic. "My daughter," Mama Ronk said, "whatever it is, breathe first." "I can't," Amaka said. "I can't breathe first. If I breathe first I might not go at all, and I have to go." Mama Ronk looked at her for a long moment, and whatever she saw in Amaka's face made her step aside without another word. Outside, the afternoon sun was a merciless gold, indifferent and bright, exactly the kind of sky that should not exist over the worst day of a person's life. Amaka stood on the curb, one hand raised, and it took 3 attempts before a taxi finally slowed for her, because her hand was shaking too badly to make the gesture look like anything other than a woman having a seizure. "St. Augustine's," she told the driver, sliding into the back seat, her half-curled, half-straightened hair sticking to her damp neck. "The one on the old market road. Please, fast." The driver, an older man with kind, tired eyes. Glanced at her in the rearview mirror and must have seen something there, because he did not ask questions. He simply pulled into traffic. The drive would take 22 minutes. Amaka knew this because she had made this same drive dozens of times over the past 2 years. To Daniel's mother's house for Sunday lunch, to the small architecture office where he worked, to the little roadside suya spot they used to visit on Friday nights, back when Friday nights still meant something other than a countdown to abandonment. She knew every pothole on this road. She knew where the taxi would slow for the broken traffic light near the market, where it would speed up on the long stretch past the old cinema, where it would idle in the small jam near the church. 22 minutes had never felt so long in her entire life. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window and closed her eyes, and immediately, without permission, her mind began doing the thing minds do in moments of catastrophe. It began replaying evidence she had ignored. Sorry, work has been a lot. I can't. I've got another dinner meeting. Just don't forget me completely. She had thought those words were the ordinary friction of a busy man building a life for the two of them. She had defended him to Chanier, to her own mother, to herself 100 small times, because that was what love did. It built explanations out of silence. It constructed entire cathedrals of reasonable doubt out of a single missed phone call. Busy men still press phone, her mother had said, and Amaka had waved the words away like smoke. You don't understand Daniel, she'd said. He's not like that. She had been so certain. Now she understood, with the sick clarity of a woman watching her own house burn down, that certainty had never been the same thing as truth. She had simply wanted so badly to be right that she had made herself right, day after day, phone call after ignored phone call, until the truth had grown so large it could no longer fit behind Daniel's silence, and so it had gone looking for another mouth to escape through. It had found Chinier's. The taxi jerked to a stop in traffic and the driver muttered an apology. Amaka opened her eyes and looked out at the street, vendors selling roasted corn, a group of schoolchildren in blue and white uniforms walking home in a loose, laughing cluster, a woman balancing a tray of bread on her head with the easy grace of long practice. Ordinary life, moving in its ordinary rhythm, oblivious to the fact that somewhere ahead of this taxi, in a church with white flowers and hired chairs, a man named Daniel was standing at an altar preparing to become someone else's husband. Her phone buzzed. Chinier again. Amaka, please, don't go alone. Let me meet you there. Please don't do anything they will use against you. Amaka typed back with trembling thumbs. I'm not going to make a scene, Chinier. I just need to see it with my own eyes. I need to know it's real before I let myself believe it. That was not entirely true. She did not know, yet, what she was going to do when she arrived. Some cold, still part of her, a part she did not recognize, a part that felt older than she was, older and harder, was simply waiting to see what would happen when the rest of her caught up. The taxi finally turned onto the old market road, and Amaka saw it before she was ready to see it. The white and gold ribbons tied along the church gate, the small crowd of well-dressed guests spilling out onto the pavement because the church itself must have been full, the string of parked cars, Mercedes, Lexus, a few gleaming SUVs she recognized from Daniel's family's compound, lined up along both sides of the road like a proud, glittering wound. Stop here, she told the driver, though they were still 100 meters from the gate. She could not make herself go closer, not in the taxi, not yet. She paid him with hands that would not stop trembling, and he took the money gently, as though she was something fragile that might shatter if handled roughly. And then he said, unprompted, Madam, whatever it is, God will fight for you, and drove off before she could respond, because there was nothing to say back to that except thank you, and she did not have the strength for even 2 syllables. She stood on the pavement in her half-done hair, in the plain blue dress she had worn to the salon because she had planned to change into something nicer later, for a date that would now never come, and she looked at the church. Someone, ahead of her, laughed, the bright, careless laugh of a woman in a lovely jewel, clearly a guest, clearly happy, clearly unaware that 50 meters behind her stood a woman whose entire future had just been dismantled like a piece of stage scenery being struck between acts. Amaka began to walk toward the gate. She did not walk fast. She did not run. Some instinct, buried beneath the shock, understood that if she ran, she would arrive as a spectacle, hair wild, chest heaving, a woman clearly out of control, Exactly the image that would follow her for the rest of her life in this town, whispered about at every gathering for the next decade. Chanier had begged her not to make a scene. And so Amaka walked, slowly, deliberately, the way a woman walks when she has decided that whatever this is going to cost her, it will not cost her her dignity. At the gate, a young usher in a matching Asui uniform, burgundy and gold, she noted distantly, the colors someone had chosen for this wedding, colors that would now be burned into her memory forever, stepped toward her with a clipboard and a professionally warm smile. "Good afternoon, Ma. Are you with the bride's family or the groom's family?" Amaka looked at this young woman, who could not have been more than 22, whose only crime was doing her job, and something in Amaka's chest cracked audibly. She was almost sure of it. She almost expected to hear the sound. "The groom's," she said. Her voice came out steady. She did not know how. The usher checked her clipboard, frowning slightly. "Sorry, Ma. Can I get your name?" "The groom's side guest list is." "I'm not on the list," Amaka said. "I don't need to be on the list. I just need to see him." The usher's smile faltered. Something in Amaka's face, or her voice, or the strange stillness of a woman standing at a wedding gate with half her hair still in disarray from a salon chair, must have registered as wrong, because the girl took a small step back and glanced over her shoulder, searching, Amaka suspected, for someone with more authority than a clipboard. But it was too late for anyone to intercept her. Through the open doors of the church, over the heads of the crowd still filtering in, Amaka could see the interior. White flowers cascading down the ends of every pew, a runner of gold fabric down the center aisle. And at the very front, small and impossibly far away and impossibly close all at once, a man in a dark suit standing beside the altar. Daniel. She would have known the set of those shoulders anywhere. She had traced them with her own hands 100 times. She had fallen asleep against them. She had planned to spend the rest of her life waking up beside them. He was not looking toward the door. He was looking down, at something in his hands, the little box that would hold the ring, she guessed, though the thought arrived without emotion attached to it, as though her mind had simply filed the information away for later processing, because there was no more room right now for anything except the raw fact of him, standing there, in a suit, at an altar, at someone else's wedding that was actually his own. And then, as if some old instinct between them had never quite died, as if 2 years of loving someone leaves a thread that survives even betrayal, Daniel looked up. Across the length of that church, across the flowers and the burgundy and gold guests and the gold aisle runner, his eyes found hers. Amaka watched his face change. She watched the color drain out of it in real time, watched his mouth open slightly as though he meant to say something, though there was no possible sound he could have made across that distance that would have reached her, and even if it had, there was nothing left that he could say that she had not already understood on her own, standing in a salon chair with a phone pressed to her ear. She did not go inside. She did not run down that gold aisle screaming his name, the way she imagined, later, some other version of herself might have done, some version with less pride or more rage. She simply stood at the gate, in her half-finished hair, and let him see her. Let him understand, in that one unbearable moment of eye contact, exactly what he had done, and exactly who had been forced to discover it from a phone call at a hair salon instead of from him. Then she turned and walked away. Behind her, she heard someone, a woman's voice, sharp with concern, say, "Daniel? Daniel, is everything?" And she did not wait to hear whether he answered. She walked back down the old market road the way she had come, past the parked cars, past the vendors, past the school children who had reached the corner by now and were arguing cheerfully about something, past a life that continued to exist around her despite the fact that hers had just been quietly demolished. She did not cry. That was the strangest part, the part she would try to explain to Chanier later and never quite managed to make understood. She had expected, if this day ever came, and some small, cowardly part of her had always known, in the marrow of her bones, that some version of this day might come. She had expected to collapse, to wail, to need to be carried. Instead, she felt something closer to a terrible, hollow calm, the calm of a building after an explosion, when the fire has burned everything it can burn and there is nothing left standing to catch. Her phone was ringing again. Chanier. She let it ring 3 times before she answered. Amaka. Amaka. Where are you? I'm almost there. I saw him, Amaka said quietly. Chanye? I saw him standing there. He looked right at me. Oh God. Oh, Amaka. Chanye's voice cracked, and Amaka realized, distantly, that her friend was crying, actually crying, harder than Amaka herself was, and there was something almost funny about that, in the black, bitter way that terrible things sometimes are funny if you look at them from exactly the wrong angle. Don't cry for me, Amaka said. Save it. I might need you to not be crying later when I actually fall apart. Where are you? Let me come get you. Please don't be alone right now. I'm walking, Amaka said. I'll call you when I stop. She did not stop for a long time. She walked past the market, past the cinema, past the church of her own childhood where she had been baptized, past a dozen landmarks of a life she had built here, in this town, around the assumption that Daniel was going to be a permanent feature of it. She walked until her feet ached inside her sandals, until the sun began its long, slow decline toward evening, painting the sky the same gold as the ribbons on that gate, as if even the heavens had agreed to participate in the wedding's color scheme, mocking her with their beauty. It was Chanye who finally caught up with her, pulling her car alongside the road and half jumping out before it had fully stopped, running to Amaka the way you run towards someone standing too close to a ledge. Amaka. Chanye took her by both shoulders, exactly the way Mama Ronk had at the salon, exactly the same gesture, as though every woman who loved Amaka today had independently arrived at the same instinct. Hold her still before she falls. Please, get in the car. Amaka let herself be led. She sat in the passenger seat and stared straight ahead through the windshield while Chanye pulled back into traffic, and for a long time neither of them spoke, because there was, for once, nothing useful to say. It was Chanye who eventually broke the silence, her voice careful, testing the ground before she put her full weight on it. Do you want to know who she is? Amaka almost laughed. The sound that came out of her throat was not quite a laugh, but it lived in the same neighborhood as one. Does it matter? Some woman is marrying my fiancé today. I don't think her name changes anything. Her name is Bonita, Chanye said anyway, quietly, as though she needed to say it regardless of whether Amaka wanted to hear it, as though the truth demanded to be spoken aloud at least once by somebody who was not afraid to say it plainly. Her father and Daniel's father have been friends for almost 30 years. There was some kind of family arrangement. I don't know all of it yet, but people are saying his father pushed hard for this. That Daniel tried to fight it for a long time before he gave in. He gave in, Amaka repeated. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. He gave in, Chanye. Not lost. Gave in. There's a whole conversation happening in that word. I know. He had 2 years to tell me there was a version of his life where I don't exist. 2 years, Chanye. He let me buy fabric for my own wedding gown 3 weeks ago. He let me argue with my mother about guest lists. He let me apologize to him on the phone for being needy when I asked why he'd been distant, when the entire time, her voice broke, finally, on that word, and something in her chest that had been holding rigid since the salon chair gave way all at once, and she put both hands over her face and wept, ugly and loud and unrestrained, the way she had not let herself weep at the church gate, the way she had been saving it, apparently, for the one place she felt safe enough to fall apart completely. Chanye pulled the car onto the shoulder of the road and simply held her, one arm awkwardly reaching across the gearshift, and let her cry. It was full dark by the time Amaka finally spoke again. I need you to take me to my mother's house, she said. Not mine. I don't want to be alone in that flat tonight. Every wall in it has him in it. Of course. And Chanye. Amaka wiped her face with the back of her hand, and when she spoke again, her voice had steadied into something new, something Chanye would later describe, when retelling this day to others, as the moment Amaka's voice stopped sounding like a woman who had lost something and started sounding like a woman who had decided what she was going to do about it. I want you to find out everything. Everything about this Bonita, everything about why his father pushed this, everything about how long they planned it while I was planning a different wedding. I'm not asking so I can go and disgrace myself outside that reception hall tonight. I'm asking because I refuse to spend the rest of my life not understanding what happened to me. I deserve at least that much. The truth. Chanye looked at her for a long moment, headlights of passing cars sweeping briefly across both their faces, and then nodded. I'll find out. They drove the rest of the way to Amaka's mother's house in silence. Amaka's mother, Mrs. Efima Chukwuma, was standing on the veranda when the car pulled into the compound, as though some maternal instinct older than telephones had already told her something was wrong before her daughter's messages ever reached her. She came down the steps quickly, wrapper gathered in one fist, and took one look at Amaka's face, swollen eyes, half-ruined hair. The blue dress she had left the house in that morning full of hope and returned in wearing something closer to grief, and did not ask a single question. She simply opened her arms. "My daughter," she said, and Amaka walked into them and let herself, for a few minutes, be nothing more than someone's child. It was much later that night, after Amaka had bathed and eaten almost nothing and finally lain down on the narrow bed of her childhood room, staring at the same ceiling she had stared at as a teenager dreaming of a different kind of future, that her phone lit up with a message. It was from Daniel. "Amaka, please. I know I don't deserve to say anything to you right now, and I know nothing I say will undo today. But please let me explain. Please don't shut the door before you've heard it from me and not from Chinier or from anyone else. I owe you that much, even if it's 2 years too late." She read the message 4 times. Then she typed back a single line, put the phone face down on the nightstand, and closed her eyes, though sleep would not come to her for a long time. The message said, "You had 2 years to explain, Daniel. You chose today instead." She did not know, lying there in the dark of her mother's house, that the message she had just sent was only the first line of a much longer story, one that would take her through grief and humiliation and a slow, hard-won reconstruction of herself, through Chinier's investigation into the Okonkwo family's arrangement, through an unexpected reckoning with Daniel's mother, and eventually toward a version of Amaka Chukwuma that the girl in that salon chair could not yet have recognized. But that night, all she knew was this: the wedding was over. The truth had finally arrived, uninvited, exactly the way it always does when someone tries too hard to keep it locked away. And somewhere across town, in a reception hall strung with burgundy and gold, a man who had once been hers was now beginning a marriage built on a foundation of silence. A foundation that, Amaka would soon learn, was far less solid than anyone at that wedding could have imagined. The Grand Delta Event Center had been decorated within an inch of its life. Burgundy drapes fell from the ceiling in soft, expensive folds. Gold Chiavari chairs lined long tables set with white orchids and candles that had not yet been lit because the sun had not yet fully surrendered the sky. A live band tuned their instruments in one corner, waiting for the signal that would tell them the newlyweds had arrived and it was time to fill this beautiful room with the kind of joyful noise that weddings were supposed to have. Nobody in that hall, watching the groom's family arrive ahead of the couple, could have guessed that the joy had already gone out of the day before the reception had even begun. Daniel sat in the back seat of the car taking him from the church to the hall, still in his dark suit, the small velvet ring box now safely on Bonita's finger instead of in his pocket, and he stared out the window at the streets sliding past without seeing any of them. He kept seeing her face instead. Amaka, standing at the church gate in her half-done hair, in the blue dress she must have left the house in that morning believing the day held nothing more dramatic than a hair appointment. He kept seeing the exact moment recognition crossed her features. Not confusion, not disbelief, but the swift, terrible clarity of a woman confirming something she had already, somewhere in her gut, begun to suspect. "You're quiet," Bonita said beside him. Her voice was gentle, careful, the voice of a woman who already understood far more about this marriage than a bride typically should on her wedding day. "I'm fine," Daniel said, which was a lie, and from the way Bonita's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly, he understood that she knew it was a lie, and that she had decided, for now, to let it pass. Bonita Adiz was not a cruel woman. Daniel had known her, in the loose, occasional way one knows the daughter of a father's old friend, for most of his adult life. Polite dinners at family gatherings, brief conversations at other people's weddings, the kind of familiarity that exists between two people who have been placed in each other's orbit by circumstance rather than choice. She was intelligent, composed, and this was the detail that made the whole arrangement feel even crueler to Daniel, entirely undeserving of being made the unknowing instrument of another woman's heartbreak. Bonita had not asked for this marriage any more than Amaka had asked to lose it. Both women, in their own ways, had been maneuvered into positions not of their choosing by two men who had decided, over a private dinner months ago, that a long-standing friendship and a series of business interests were worth more than either woman's say in the matter. Daniel closed his eyes and let his head fall back against the seat. He remembered, with the vividness that only guilt seems to preserve, the conversation with his father that had started all of this. "Daniel, have you made your decision?" "Yes, sir. If Bonita is willing, I'm willing, too." He remembered his father's face in that moment. Not triumphant, not cruel, but tired. The face of an old man calling in the last favor of a lifetime of careful alliances, a man who genuinely believed, in his own way, that he was securing his son's future rather than destroying it. "This isn't the face of a man who's just received good news," his father had said, watching him. "Because someone good is going to get hurt. Then make sure you don't destroy her dignity," his father had told him. "I'll try," Daniel had said. "Don't try," his father had corrected, with the particular sternness of a man who had spent his whole life learning the difference between trying and doing. "Do the right thing, whatever that looks like." Daniel had carried those words with him for months afterward. Do the right thing, whatever that looks like, turning them over and over, searching for the version of right that did not end with Amaka's heart in pieces. He had never found it. There had been no way to do this rightly. There had only been ways to do it less wrongly, and even those had slipped through his fingers, week after week, as he chose silence over honesty, comfort over confrontation, the easy lie of "I miss you, come see me tomorrow" over the hard truth that would have cost him everything he was too afraid to lose all at once. He had told himself, each time he postponed the conversation, that he was protecting her, that there would be a better moment, that she deserved to hear it gently, not abruptly, and so he kept waiting for gentleness to arrive, not understanding, or refusing to understand, that gentleness was never going to arrive on its own. He would have had to build it, deliberately, with his own hands, out of courage he did not have. "Daniel, have you told her?" his father had asked him, more than once. "Not yet," he had answered, more than once. "Don't let another person tell her," his father had warned him. "She deserves to hear it from you." "Yes, sir," Daniel had said. And then he had let another person tell her anyway. Not through malice, through cowardice, which in the end amounted to the same wound delivered by a different hand. The car slowed outside the Grand Delta Event Center, where the band could already be heard tuning through the open doors, where guests in burgundy and gold were arranging themselves for photographs, where his mother stood near the entrance in her elaborate gear, beaming with a happiness that Daniel understood, with a sudden, exhausted clarity she did not actually feel, only performed, for the sake of appearances, for the sake of the family alliance her husband had spent 30 years building. "Ready?" Bonita asked quietly, as the driver came around to open her door. "No," Daniel admitted, because it was the only honest thing he had said all day, and something in Bonita's face softened slightly at the admission, as though his honesty, however small and however late, was the first thing about this entire arrangement that had not felt like a performance. "Me neither," she said. "But we're here now. Let's get through today, and figure the rest out later." They walked into the reception together, hand in hand, to applause and cheering and the swelling opening notes of the live band's first number, and Daniel smiled the way a man smiles when 100 cameras are pointed at his face and he has no choice left but to give them what they came for. Across town, in the narrow bedroom of her childhood, Amaka lay in the dark and listened to her phone buzz against the nightstand over and over, and did not pick it up. The first few calls, she recognized by the caller ID, were from Daniel. She let them ring through to silence. Later, she would learn he had also tried calling her mother directly, then Chinier, in an increasingly desperate attempt to be heard by anyone who might pass the message along, and that both women had, without needing to consult each other, refused to answer. It was nearly midnight when a different name lit up her screen. Momsy, Daniel's mother, whom Amaka had called by that affectionate name for almost 2 years, ever since the older woman had insisted on it during their very first meeting. "Sit down, my daughter. Don't call me Mrs. Okonkwo. Call me Momsy. We are family now." Amaka stared at the name on her screen for a long time before she answered. "Amaka." The voice on the other end was thick with something that might have been shame. "My daughter. I don't even know how to start this call." "Then maybe you shouldn't have," Amaka said. Her voice was flat, drained of the tears that had emptied out of her earlier that evening, leaving behind only a kind of exhausted precision. You knew, didn't you? All those Sunday lunches. All those times you told me you couldn't wait to have grandchildren who looked like me. You knew. There was a long pause, and in it, Amaka heard everything she needed to hear. I knew, Momsy admitted finally, quietly. I found out 3 months ago. I fought your husband's father. I fought my own husband. Over this, Amaka, more than you will ever know. I told him it was wrong. I told him you deserved better than to be discarded for the sake of an old friendship. But in this family, when the men decide something, the women are expected to arrange the flowers around it and smile. And did you smile today? Another pause, longer this time. Yes, Momsy said, and her voice cracked slightly on the single word, as though the admission cost her something real. God forgive me, I smiled. Because if I hadn't, they would have said I was disloyal to my own son on his wedding day, and I did not have it in me to fight that battle in front of 300 guests. I am ashamed of my smile, Amaka. I will carry the shame of it for a long time. Amaka closed her eyes. She did not know what to do with an apology this honest, delivered by a woman who had genuinely loved her, in a situation where honesty had arrived far too late to change anything. I don't hate you, Momsy, she said finally, and found, to her own surprise, that it was true. But I don't think I can call you that anymore. Not after today. I understand, Momsy said, and Amaka heard, even through the phone, the sound of the older woman beginning to cry. I don't deserve for you to call me anything at all. I only wanted you to know that not everyone in this family celebrated what happened to you today. Some of us mourned it, even while we were forced to smile through it. The call ended shortly after that, both women too exhausted by grief to sustain a conversation that had nowhere left to go. Amaka lay in the dark for a long time afterward, staring at the ceiling, turning Mom's words over in her mind. Not everyone in this family celebrated. It was, she supposed, meant to be a comfort. It did not feel like one. It felt, instead, like confirmation of something she was only beginning to understand. That an entire family, an entire network of people who had known her, fed her, called her daughter, had watched this catastrophe approach for months and had chosen, every single one of them, silence over warning. Not out of cruelty. Out of the particular cowardice that convinces itself it is merely staying out of other people's business. She thought of her own mother's voice, weeks ago, warning her gently. Busy men still press phone. She thought of how quickly she had waved the warning away. And she thought, with a bitterness that surprised her by how sharp it still was, that perhaps the cruelest part of betrayal was not the betrayal itself, but the number of people who had seen it coming and let her walk toward it anyway, believing, each of them, that it was not their place to stop her. She did not sleep until nearly dawn. The following morning, Chinier arrived at Mrs. Chukwuma's compound with a laptop bag over one shoulder and an expression of grim, focused determination that Amaka recognized immediately. It was the same expression Chinier had worn during university exams, the look of a woman who had decided that information was the only weapon available to her and intended to gather as much of it as humanly possible. I told you I would find out everything, Chinier said, settling onto the veranda beside Amaka with 2 cups of tea neither of them would drink. So I found out everything. Tell me, Amaka said. Bonita's father is Chief Emeka Adiz. He owns a shipping and logistics company, one of the biggest in the southeast. Daniel's father has been trying to get into a joint venture with that company for almost 4 years. Every deal kept falling apart at the last stage because Chief Adiz wanted, in his words, more than a business partnership, a family bond. 3 months ago, the joint venture finally went through. Guess what was signed the same week the paperwork was finalized? Amaka felt something cold settle in her stomach. The marriage arrangement. The marriage arrangement, Chinier confirmed. Amaka, I'm not saying this to make it hurt worse. I'm saying it because I think you need to understand exactly what happened to you, and it wasn't that Daniel stopped loving you. From everything I've been able to gather, and I spoke to 3 different people close to that family, including someone who works for Chief Adiz directly, Daniel fought this for months. He apparently told his father, more than once, that he was already committed to someone. His father's response, according to my source, was that commitments made without a father's blessing were not commitments at all, only preferences, and preferences could be revised. Preferences, Amaka repeated, and the word tasted like poison in her mouth. 2 years of my life. A wedding date. Fabric I bought for my own gown. Preferences that could be revised. I know, Chanier said softly. I know how that sounds. I'm only telling you because I promised you the truth, and because I think, Amaka, I think you deserve to understand that this was never really a contest between you and Bonita. You were never in competition with her. She didn't win anything from you. This was two old men deciding the shape of a business deal and dressing it up as a wedding so that nobody would have to call it what it actually was. Amaka sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing this, feeling the shape of her own heartbreak shift slightly under the new weight of context. It did not make the pain smaller. If anything, it made it larger, wider, because now it was not simply the story of one man's cowardice. It was the story of an entire system of men who had decided, among themselves, that women's futures were negotiable line items in a business ledger.